Hello again, my name is Dr. Mark Sandoval, and this is the 10-Day Immune Challenge, and we are looking at day number 6. And on today, we are going to be looking at the topic of stress and immunity. Stress and immunity. So what is stress? Stress is a maladaptive response to a perceived threat. It always begins as a thought in the mind, and that thought is then transmitted to the rest of the body and generates physiologic effects in the body. And that stress response is highly dependent upon your perspective. Your perspective makes a big difference. For example, imagine that you're going for a walk one day, and as you are doing so, you turn around and you notice that there's this big dog that is chasing you, is running at you at full speed, teeth bared, foaming at the mouth. You think rabies, and he is going to get you. Well, what happens then? You have a thought of fear. That thought impacts the cortex of your brain. That is transmitted down to the central part of the brain, the limbic system, where the emotions, chemistry, and so on of that is produced. And memory and so on gets pulled into this as well. And there in your hypothalamus, this information is conducted as well. And the hypothalamus is the control center for your fight or flight response, your sympathetic nervous system. And so that information is transferred down the rest of the sympathetic nervous system fibers to the different parts of the body, as you can see in the diagram, to the pupils, the heart, the rest of the body here, and there are physiologic effects. What are those effects? Well, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your blood sugar levels go up, your blood lipids go up, your blood clotting factors increase, your pupils dilate, your muscles tense, blood flow to your muscles and your brain increases, your bladder relaxes, digestion turns off or it significantly slows down, and blood flow to your skin decreases because, well, if you get caught by the dog, you might bleed less than if it had increased. And so on. All of these effects happen, but what was it that began this whole cascade? It was a thought of fear. A thought of fear, and all of these changes that happen in the system in response to that thought of fear. So how does stress impact the immune system? What does it do to the immune system? So again, we start at the same place. We have a thought of fear. Thought of fear that then mediated to the cortex of the brain, through the limbic system, down to the hypothalamus, just as we looked at before. This time we're going to tease out its pathway as it pertains to the immune system. So from there in the hypothalamus, those signals are sent down the spinal cord to the sympathetic chain ganglia. Well, sometimes it bypasses, and it's going to go to particular organs. Particularly, we're going to be looking at the spleen, the lymph nodes, the bone marrow, and the thymus. These are your secondary and primary lymphoid tissues where your immune system basically lives and is born and is educated and so on. And so those are impacted by those nerve signals. Also, some of those nerve signals go to the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands will release hormones that then travel through the bloodstream to those different lymphoid organs as well. And they and the adrenal glands will produce all sorts of chemicals in response to that, including things like epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, prolactin, growth hormone, melatonin, beta-endorphin, enkephalin, and so on. And these substances then are traveling through the bloodstream, through the blood and the plasma, and they come to the white blood cells. And the white blood cells, they have receptors on them for these different chemicals, these different hormones. And when those chemicals or those hormones get to the white blood cells, it changes how they behave. And so it might turn down their reproduction, or it might increase their reproduction. It influences immune system's function. Now, the immune system has two main arms to it when you talk about activating the immune system. And under the influence of what are called Th1 cytokines, these are T helper cell cytokines, they cause or influence your macrophages, your lymphocytes, and your polymorphonuclear leukocytes. These are different types of white blood cells to ramp up their activity in finding and killing the bad guys. And this activity of the immune cells in finding and attacking the bad guys is called cellular immunity. So that's one arm, is the cellular immunity. The other side, predominantly stimulated by Th2 cytokines, these stimulate the B cells, or your B lymphocytes, to produce antibodies, which can then be involved in neutralizing toxins, identifying the bad guys so that cellular immunity can work better, and so on. And this antibody response is called humoral immunity. So you have cellular immunity and you have humoral immunity. And this is how things are supposed to operate on a regular basis. But what happens if acute stress turns into chronic stress? What happens if that rabid dog chases you every day, every week, every month of every year? What happens when acute stress turns into chronic stress? Well, there is a response to chronic stress in the immune system in that, one, cellular immunity, remember the white blood cells going and attacking, finding and attacking the bad guys, cellular immunity is decreased under chronic stress. So your ability to fight cancer and to fight infections is suppressed. And two, your humoral immunity, producing those antibodies, that is exacerbated or overactive, and you can end up with things like allergies and autoimmune conditions as well. We also know that chronic emotional stress, it leads to steroid receptor resistance. Why? Because part of what's produced, we talked about cortisol. Cortisol is a steroid hormone produced by the adrenal glands, and that cortisol is released along with epinephrine and norepinephrine, and you have receptors in the cells of the body for those steroid hormones like cortisol. And those receptors, if you have cortisol that's out there too much for too long, those receptors can downregulate. And when they downregulate, it means that there's fewer of the receptors, so the cortisol doesn't function the way that it normally would have, and so you end up with poor control of the inflammatory cascade, and you end up with overrunning, overproductive, increased inflammation. And here is a short list of conditions that are associated with inflammation. It's not a complete list, it's just a short list of conditions that are associated with inflammation. So you can see that you can end up with all sorts of problems, all sorts of issues if you have this runaway inflammation. Now there's an interesting study done at the University of North Carolina. This particular part of the study was done with their medical students, and what they did is they took the class and they gave them this Cook-Medley hostility scale or test. And it's a test of hostility. How hostile is an individual? And so everybody took this test, and then what they did is they basically just ranked it. They did the least hostile to the most hostile, cut the class in half. Here you have the half of the class that's the most hostile, the other half of the class that's the least hostile, and then they followed them for 25 years. And what did they find after 25 years? Well, the half of the class that was the most hostile were 5 times more likely to develop heart disease and 6 times more likely to die by the age of 50, because the average age of the class was 25 at the beginning, and this is 25 years later, so by the time they're 50, 5 times more likely to get heart disease, 6 times more likely to die from any cause. That is a very strong risk factor for cardiovascular disease and death. Even stronger than smoking, even stronger than no exercise, even stronger than high cholesterol levels put together. Now, they did the same study with their law students, And same type of thing. What they found is that by the age of 50, because again, their average age was 25, 4% of the class in the least hostile group were dead, and 20% of the class in the most hostile group were dead by the time the study was over. Again, huge effects. And by the way, if you were ever wondering, the average hostility scale for the lawyers was higher than that for the physicians. All right, so, and I say that because I'm a physician, but I've got friends and family that are lawyers, and I love them too. So, it's not just hostility, there's loneliness too. Loneliness, we're told, it not only alters behavior, but loneliness is related to greater resistance to blood flow throughout your cardiovascular system. Well, what happens when you have greater resistance to blood flow? Well, you're going to have to push harder to get the blood going through. So again, loneliness leads to higher rises in the morning levels of stress hormone cortisol. They alter gene expression in immune cells, so even it changes the genes, how they express themselves in your immune system. And poorer immune function, higher blood pressure, and increased levels of depression. All of these are a result of loneliness. So what about our thoughts in general? Here's a really interesting study. What they did is they took 24 women between the ages of 57 and 60, and they separated them into two groups randomly. The one group, they had 12 of the women, and they told them to focus to think about a negative event in their life, maybe loss of a loved one, when they were divorced, other things like that. And then 6 minutes later, they gave them their flu shot. The other group, similar type of thing, 12 individuals randomized to it, same age, same situation, except this time they told them to think about a positive thought, something very positive in their life. When they were married, had a child, something happy happened, won the lottery, I guess. And then 6 minutes later, they gave them their flu shot. What they did is they checked to make sure that they didn't have any preformed antibodies to that flu vaccine beforehand, and then they checked at 2 months and 6 months, and what they found was that for the positive thinking group, they had significantly more antibodies that were produced to that flu shot 6 months later. So what does that tell me? It tells me that 6 minutes of positive or negative thinking can have 6 months worth of immune function, increased function or dysfunction, depending upon whether the thinking was good or the thinking was bad. Powerful stuff. So what about our mental attitude? Well, 193 adults between the ages of 21 to 55, they were evaluated for their positive emotional style, whether they're happy and lively and calm and so on, and they controlled for negative emotional style, which would be the opposite of that. Cognitive and social disposition, self-reported health, and so on, just to make sure that those were not confounding factors. And what they did is they exposed everybody to nasal drops of rhinovirus and influenza virus. So they gave them the viruses they're associated with the cold, the common cold or the flu. And then they quarantined them so that they didn't have additional exposure, and they watched them. And what they found is that the group that had the positive emotional style, they were significantly less likely to ever develop any symptoms associated with cold or flu, even though they were exposed to the same viruses. Very interesting, especially when we think of that in context of our current pandemic situation. Psychosocial stress can affect cancer as well. We know that that when one has increased psychosocial stress, you're more likely to develop cancer in the first place, and you're more likely to die from cancer if you have it. We have research that shows that if you can identify the nerve that's going to the center of a tumor and you clip that nerve, it changes how the tumor behaves. That means that there is some control coming from the mind to the tumor that is controlling its behavior. In fact, an interesting review study done back in the very end of 2018, what they showed was that the nervous system actually has an impact upon cancer all the way from the beginning to the end. Initially, you have to have these cancer cells, and you can see in a diagram here on the screen, the cancer cells, they start growing and developing and getting more in number in the location where they're at. Well, the nervous system, neuropeptides, neurotransmitters, neurotrophins, and so on, can help in that process so that it begins that growth. Next, here we see that there are cells normally stuck next to their neighbors, and some of them have what's called a basement membrane where they're attached to. Well, cells are supposed to die if they separate from that basement membrane. It's called anoikos. And if they separate from that basement membrane and continue to live, you have to turn that process off. And turning it off, the nervous system can help do that. There's this transition called the epithelial mesenchymal transition. And what happens there is cells look very much regulated. There's a top, there's a bottom, and so on. And those cells begin to become transformed. They don't kind of look like that anymore. Now the top, you're not sure where top and bottom is. They become more like a cell that can, like a stem cell kind of, that can transition into various different things. You look at it, you're not exactly sure what it is. And those mesenchymal cells aren't so stuck to their neighbors. They can move and get to different locations. Well, that transition from a stuck cell to a mobile cell, the nervous system can help with that too. Extravasation, meaning that the tumor cells getting into the blood vessels and then being able to travel to another location, get out of the blood vessel into the surrounding tissue and be able to start growing there. Metastasis, well, the nervous system helps with that too. Angiogenesis, the growth of new blood vessels to the tumor so that it can support its growth. Nervous system can help with that too. The evasion of the immune system. Arranging things in such a way so that the surface of the cells don't show the things that the immune system is looking for, so the immune system doesn't know that this is a bad guy. The nervous system can help with that as well. And then the tumor microenvironment, the tissue and the fluids and the other stuff like that in the environment that gives feedback to the cells as they grow, the cancer cells. All of that related to the nervous system. It's very powerful, and it's very interesting, at least in my clinical experience, that most individuals who develop cancer do so within a year to a few years of a major stressful event in their life. So I mentioned at the beginning that our perspective is very powerful when it comes to this stress response and its impact upon the immune system. So we're going to look at this idea of a fort. Here on the screen, you see a picture of a fort. It's a beautiful looking fort. There's high walls, of course. It's made of some kind of rock or stone. Below it is stone with high walls and so on. Let's imagine that we are now in the old-fashioned days. It's days of bows and arrows and slings and so on. And you have an enemy army that comes up to that fort, and you are inside. How much stress do you have while you're inside? The answer is, it depends. What does it depend upon? It depends upon your belief, your perception. If you believe that your fort is impenetrable, there's no way the invaders can get through even though they're close, then you don't have any stress while you're inside because you don't perceive any risk, any threat by that because your fortress is impenetrable. But if you believe that your fortress is penetrable, and to the degree that you think it can be broken into or broken down, is the degree to which you will have stress while you're inside of your fort. Your perspective determines how much stress you're going to have. So what is your fort? And how reliable is it? What are you relying upon as your fort, and how reliable is it? If you are in stress, you do not have a reliable fort. So what is the foundation of stress? We're just going to cover this briefly and then wrap up. We're not going to get to a lot of solutions today. That's what tomorrow is going to be about. We're going to look at solutions tomorrow. So what's the foundation of stress? Stress is, the foundation of it is to fail to control that which I believe I should be able to control. A failure to control what I believe that I should be able to control. Like time. We get stressed because we're running late and we're trying to make it up. We get stressed because we can't control the environment or our circumstances. It's not going the way that we wanted it to. And we want to be able to control it so that we can, but we can't, so we get stressed. We get stressed because we can't control resources, whether that's money, whether that's access to food, whether it's other types of things like that. And so to the degree that those things are difficult is the degree to which we're stressed because we try to control those things. We also try to control others. How well is that going? Usually not very well, and so on. So who alone can control time? Who alone can control environment, circumstances, resources, and others? Well, only God can, right? So when I believe that I should be able to control all of these things, who do I believe I am? I'm God. I'm God. And that is humanity's identity crisis. We believe that we're God. And when I believe that I'm God, I believe that I should be able to control these things, but guess what? I'm not God and I'm not able to control them. And so when I'm not able to control them, but I think I should, the result is stress. And guess what? I am an unreliable fort. So when I am the fort, I can't rely upon it. There's stress. I believe that others are my source of love, but they don't have the love I need. What kind of love do I need? I need a love that is unselfish. I need a love that is constant, a love that is full. But no human being has that love like I need it. So I'm never full, I'm never complete, I'm always partially empty at least. That means that others are an unreliable fort. So if I am unreliable and others are unreliable, what can I find as a reliable fort? I need an impenetrable, enduring fort to rely upon. So what is that fort? We are told in Psalm 91 in verses 2 and 3, "The Lord is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in Him I will trust. He shall deliver me." He shall deliver me. He is the fortress that we can trust in. Now, and don't forget to check out our resources that are available at uchpines.org. We have resources on COVID-19 at /COVID-19. We also have our virtual lifestyle sessions that can be found at uchpines.org/virtual. The next one begins on April 17. And then we have the 17-day virtual lifestyle sessions that begin on May 31st. The 17th is a 6-day challenge, and our Lifestyle Center regular sessions in-house here at our Lifestyle Center can be found at uchpines.org/lifestyle-center. It is a pleasure spending this time together with you. I pray that you might have greater abundant health as we continue through this immunity challenge together.